Hello, welcome back. My name is Ari, and today it is the mid-year book freakout tag that everybody's doing. I understand that's a little past mid-year, a little bit late. That's all right. No harm, no foul. So let's get through this. I took the questions for this tag from Kayla at Books at Lala, so there is a chance that these are different from all the ones that you guys have seen so far, because Kayla's notorious for like leaving off things, adding things. You know, it's fine. I'm just too lazy to go look at other tags. So I'm scooting over here. You have plenty of room for covers right here, because usually when I read books, I either get rid of them or I put them in storage until we move into a bigger place, which should be next month maybe. But yeah, we're just gonna stick covers up over here. First question, we're getting right to the good stuff. What is my favorite book so far this year? For best book, I usually struggle picking like my favorite at the end of every year, and right now it's kind of between two of them. So I'm going to talk about both of them. The first one is the Cashew Preservation Society by John Scalzi, I believe. This is a novella about like a park ranger for kaiju, which are like Godzilla creatures. Basically, this woman loses her job during the pandemic, gets hired on as like a maintenance person on a large animal preservation. It pays really well, but it's very, very secretive. It ends up being an alternate reality where they're preserving kaiju. It was really cool. It was funny, it was fun, just different, lighthearted, but with like a minor little mystery plot to it. I very much enjoyed it, and it's a really, really quick read. The other book that would be in the contention for my favorite this year is The Red Tree by Caitlin something. Covers here. This is the ugliest color. Like, I feel so bad for this author because all of their covers are horrendously ugly. And I'm betting people don't read the books because of this. So the main character on this cover is not at all what the character in the book looks like. She's an older woman and like a very butch lesbian, which is not the vibe that you're getting from this. But this is kind of like horror in the vein of The House of Leaves. Our main character, her girlfriend has committed suicide, and she's an author, so she decides to go stay at like a farmhouse in the middle of the country to maybe write, because she's like really, really late on her book and she's already blown through her advance. So she's staying in the middle of nowhere in the country, very cheap lodgings, trying to get the inspiration to write. Instead of writing a book, she's like doing diary entries. And so these are the diary entries that we're seeing mixed with somebody else's writing that she finds. And there's this weird thing going on with the tree, the red tree out back of this house. And there's that like spatial like thing that you see in House of Leaves, where it's like the area is a lot bigger than it should be. Like the trip it takes to get to the tree, even though you could see it out the back window and it doesn't look more than 30 yards away, sometimes it'll take like hours and hours to walk there, and you're just like, what the hell's going on? There's also like caves and stuff underneath the house, which you see in House of Leaves. And then the story within a story is she finds somebody else's writing, includes that in her journal pages, and then our main character, we know from the very beginning she is dead. So she dies before finishing the story. Her editor finds these journal entries and then publishes them as a manuscript, because they can't actually be journal entries because they're so like bizarre. So it's a very interesting, like, layered upon layered piece. And the fact that she's dead isn't a spoiler. Like, literally the book starts with a note from the editor post-mortem of the author. So you know from page 1 that she's dead. That was a lot of talking about one book, but it was kind of hard to explain. So let's go to the next question. What is my favorite sequel so far this year? Now, I've read a lot of sequels, and I don't feel like anything stands out so much as like, oh, this was 5 stars, this was my favorite, except for Misrule. And I'm gonna put this as my favorite sequel because I really, really enjoyed Misrule, but I didn't like the book that came before it, which was Malice. So this is by, Heather Walter, maybe? I read Malice last year for Goodreads Choice because it was in the fantasy category. I got the sequel as an ARC. Didn't expect anything of it because I think I gave Malice 2 stars and I hated it. And then I really, really liked the sequel and gave it 4 stars. So the sequel is better than the first book. So if you read the first book and you didn't like it, I'd recommend the sequel, but I wouldn't recommend reading the first book just to get to the better sequel. It's not that good, even if it is better. Next question is, what is my favorite reread of the year so far? The obvious answer to this one is going to be Mistborn, because I've reread Mistborn. But outside of the obvious answer, I reread A Little Stranger by Sarah Waters, which I haven't read through college and I didn't have like a rating for. It's like I remember it, but I didn't remember if I enjoyed it or not. I just remembered reading it. And I did. I gave it 5 stars. It's a very, very good literary horror tale. So I'm very happy I read that, and I will continue reading more of Sarah Waters' historical fiction. This is post-World War II Britain historical fiction about a wealthy landowning family that has basically lost all of their money, and their beautiful expensive mansion is falling down around them because they don't have the money for upkeep, and everybody in the family is going crazy and dying. Next question is a new release this year that I haven't read yet but really want to, and that is Destiny of the Dead by Kel Cade. This is the sequel to Fate of the Fallen. Fate of the Fallen asks, basically, you have a chosen one, you have a prophesized chosen one. What happens when the chosen one dies in the first chapter? And the story of this is really interesting because the chosen one's best friend has kind of like picked up the mantle and is trying to complete his quest, but like, and he goes to governments and he's like, hey, this is what happens, blah blah blah, and pretty much everybody's like, oh, we're doomed, sucks to suck, and that's it. Like, I guess we're gonna die, oh well. It's got the twist on the chosen one trope, and then the anti-hero. Like, he doesn't want to be a hero, he's just doing it because he's the only one, which isn't an anti-hero, but like a reluctant hero. That's the phrase I'm looking for. But I really, really love the first book, so I'm excited to read this. I just haven't gotten a chance to pick it up yet. Haven't made a chance to pick it up yet. I'll get to it. Next question is, what genre am I reading the most, or the genre that I'm reading more than I normally do? So the genre I'm reading the most is fantasy, because it's always fantasy. Like, a good 50% of my reading every year is fantasy. The genre I'm reading more than I normally do, which is way more interesting than just I read a lot of fantasy, is nonfiction. Nonfiction is my second largest genre so far this year. I'll stick up a pie chart of my reading so far, and that nonfiction is surprisingly large. That's what she said. Next question is a book that made me happy, and for this one I'm gonna go for Straight by Chuck Tingle. Chuck Tingle in general makes me happy. This was a ridiculous horror novel about once a year all of the straight people in the world go batshit crazy and turn into zombies and try to kill all of the queer people. And it's just the perspective of a group of queer people trying to survive in this like slasher fiction thing. It's ridiculous. It's got some good messages, and it kind of mocks the hatred that random straight people have for queer people. If you're gonna be easily offended, I definitely don't recommend this, but if you're willing, you want some laughs about the state of our universe right now, this one's got some laughs in it. Next question, a book that made me cry. Now, everything makes me cry. I cry at jewelry commercials, so this is a fairly, and everything I've ever read has made me cry probably at some point. But for this one, the saddest book I've read this year is probably The Last Nomad by Sugary. I can't remember her last name, but her first name is Sugary. And this is a memoir about growing up in the Somalia desert as a nomad. And she's the last nomad in her family. But this talks about her life as a nomad. It talks about surviving the Somali civil war, fleeing to Canada. But it also talks about like typical Somali life and what it's like being a woman in Somalia, where female circumcision is still a thing. And she has an entire chapter where she goes into graphic detail about her very experience with female circumcision. And she doesn't excuse it, and she doesn't say it's a good thing, but she kind of explains like the culture behind it and don't like why it's done. It's one of those things where it's horrible, and in hindsight, as an adult woman, she understands it's horrible. But when she was a child, it was something she was excited for because it's just a normal, everyday part of her culture. And then just the experiences she went through with that, in all its like gory details, like I was bawling my eyes out. And I think I was listening to it in public and like and trying not to like make everybody look at the sobbing girl. But this is a really, really interesting story if you can handle the graphic details of it. But there are graphic details, so if that's something that you don't think you could stomach reading or listening to, definitely wouldn't recommend. I do recommend the audiobook though. The audiobook is beautifully narrated. Next question is an anticipated release for the second half of 2022. And I guess my most anticipated release is, we're going back to Mistborn and Brandon Sanderson. It's going to be The Lost Metal, which is Mistborn Era 2 Book 4. So Wax and Wayne series Book 4 comes out in November. There are other books. The final book in the Skullomance series by Naomi Novik, I'm looking forward to that. I'm sure I have pre-orders for other things that I just really can't think of off the top of my head, but The Lost Metal, definitely number one. The biggest disappointment that I've read for the year, I'm gonna have to chalk this one up to The Awakening by Kate Chopin, because this was on my 5-star predictions and I think I gave it 2 or 3 stars. I was just way more bored than I thought I was going to be reading this. So I was like, oh, okay, yeah, I don't care. Great. But yeah, this one wasn't for me. I like the ending, but I was so bored for the rest of the story. And so just like rolling my eyes at this supposedly adult woman's actions, and that I didn't care. I didn't care. Biggest surprise. I read, I think in February, maybe even January, Coming of Age in Mississippi by Anne Moody. And this is an autobiography that she wrote in the 60s about her about her growing up in Mississippi, right? So she's a poor black girl born in Mississippi in like the 1940s, and it goes up through the 60s when she graduates college. So early childhood through college. A lot of it's about like her living through the civil rights movement and her like participation in the civil rights movement. This was so good, and I expected it to be like interesting and educational, but this was so good. It reads like fiction. It doesn't have that like dense nonfiction feel to it that is boring, and it doesn't ramble on, because like some people's memoirs or autobiographies or whatever, they like go off topic all the time. This one has a subject, sticks to it, tells stories in chronological order. You're not jumping around, not going on rants, anything like that. So it is very interesting. And it was also really interesting to read this particular perspective on the civil rights movement, where usually what you're going to read is the leaders of the civil rights movement, and usually men, right? So this is from a woman who is not a leader. She's not giving speeches. She's the one she is one of the people who are actually doing the sit-ins, actually living in these small racist towns, afraid that somebody's going to throw a Molotov cocktail through her window in the middle of the night. She's like in the trenches, not somebody important, but somebody very, very easy to hate by racist white people. Not easy to hate in general. And I caveat that. But like reading this different perspective from like a woman's perspective, and then somebody who's not a leader, just somebody who's just a regular human being who wants rights. It was really, really well written and really, really interesting. So I definitely highly recommend this. Ignore the ugly cover and pick this up if you were interested in reading more about the civil rights movement. The next question is favorite new author. I don't know. I'm gonna say maybe not my favorite new author, but the author that I've read something from that I'm now interested in reading more from is going to be Kate Elliott. The book that I read by her was a novella called Servant Mage, and this was a really, really cool like origin story, and it intrigued me enough that I would be very interested in reading more by her. But there hasn't been like an author that I've read a book by this year that is like, oh, this is my favorite author now, because I haven't read like a bunch of books by a new author this year, if that makes sense. Like favorite is kind of you read a bunch of books in different series, and oh, this is a favorite author. I haven't done anything like that this year, and there's no authors that I've like solidified as a favorite this year. I don't know if that makes sense. The next question was new favorite character, but I'm gonna skip it because I don't have a new favorite character. I just don't. I went through the books like 3 or 4 times that I've read this year, and there's no one that stands out as like, oh my god, that was my favorite character in that book. Sorry. Most beautiful cover out of the books that I've read this year. So I have 2, and they're very, very different, but I think both of them are beautiful in their way. First one is Daughter of the Moon Goddess, which this is a stunning cover. I think a lot of people are gonna have this as like the most beautiful cover of the year. Sure, I get it. The other one for me is Come Fly With Me. I think this cover is stunning. What do you think? Next question is a book I need to read before the end of the year. I read like 260 books a year. There's like 100 of them that I need to read before the end of the year. I don't have any specific one that I have to read more than all of the others, if that makes sense. So I don't know, all of them? not a question for me, really. The last question that I have on here before I'm gonna add my own question is my favorite videos that I make. And for me, my TBR videos are my favorite. I have a TBR game called Dungeon of Books where I take a giant D20 and roll the D20, and then whatever number I roll gives me a prompt, and they're changeable prompts. I've got a big board. I draw 5-6 books a month, something like that, through that game. So that's fun. Those are my favorite videos, is making my Dungeon of Books TBRs every month. The question that I want to add personally is, what are you reading right now? I'm currently reading 4 books right now. I have an audiobook called Don't Let It Get You Down that I'm almost finished with, that I started last month and have been reading, like listening to on my way to and from work, but I live less than 5 minutes from work, so I don't get very much of it done every day. I'm also reading Nick Offerman's newest book, which is Where the Deer and the Antelope Play, which is just observations about nature. I'm a little over halfway done with it. I'm on part 3. I'll finish it today. Not my favorite, but it's not like the worst thing I've ever read. Also reading A Prayer for the Crown Shy by Becky Chambers. This came in earlier this week. It's Saturday, like it's the day you see this is the day I'm recording it, but I got this on Tuesday when it released, so reading that. And then Empire Star by Samuel Delaney. Reading this, I just finished Babel 17, which is one of these books where most of it is Babel 17, and then you flipped the book over and you have another book on the back, and that is Empire Star. So I'm finishing up Empire Star, which is a novella by Samuel Delaney. So yes, I'm one of those people who reads like a bunch of books all at once and just switches back and forth. I had an ebook as well, but I just finished it. That'll be in my ARC vlog for this month. And yeah, that's what I'm reading right now. So let me know down in the comments below your answer to any one of these questions. The questions are down in the description if you forgot them, but pick one or multiple. Leave your answer down below. If you don't want to answer any of the questions, but you just want to leave me an emoji to kind of say hi, leave me your favorite emoji or your most used emoji of the year so far. That's all I got for you today. Thank you for watching this video if you're new to my channel, and if you're not new to my channel and you're just here hanging out with all my other videos, thank you so much for watching the video of stuff you probably already knew. See you in the next one. Bye.